Okay, does that look like we are in slideshow mode? Great, thumbs up, I see, great. Okay, so yes, thanks everyone for attending today. This is the third time I've given this talk, but it's the first time I've done this talk via Zoom, which I'm looking forward to because it gives me the opportunity to include a bunch of cool pictures that is more difficult to do in person. We've had this talk the past 2 years at the research farm, which is out by the Takini, it's near the Hot Springs Road near Takini Gas, just before that turnoff there. So I think probably in the future we'll end up having similar talks there as well, but happy to see everyone over Zoom today. So I thought I would just start with a little bit of background about me. So I've been in the Yukon for close to a decade now, but in a previous life I worked in BC as an integrated pest management consultant in the Lower Mainland area, Fraser Valley, and had predominantly blueberry producers as my clients. So I'd visit farms and walk the fields and then advise on if there was anything needed in terms of pest management for producers. So that's the perspective that I bring and the background that I bring to this talk today. I'll start out with the picture here. I'm not sure if people can see my cursor. Can you see it on the screen? Thumbs up, okay, great. So some insect things that you might be looking for in your crop are very, very small. And I chose this picture for the beginning slide because these are cabbage root maggot eggs. So this is at the base of a little cabbage seedling, and these eggs are laid, these white little guys here. So it was just a good example of how closely you sometimes need to look in your field or garden to figure out what's going on. So what is IPM or integrated pest management? This is a very well-known method of pest management that's used for larger scale agriculture all around the world, but the concepts are all applicable to the home garden as well. IPM is an approach that uses sort of 4 key pillars when it comes to pest management, and I'll go through each of these in more detail throughout the presentation. So the first is really a good knowledge of how to ID pests and what you're seeing in your field or garden. Learn about their biology and their behavior. The next, which is a critical piece of IPM, is regular monitoring of the crop or of the garden. So getting out there and getting your fingers dirty and getting up close and personal to see what's going on. It also includes the concept of thresholds for decision making, which is a little less applicable to the home garden setting, but nonetheless an important part of IPM. And then the use of a variety of control methods, which is commonly referred to as the IPM toolbox. So I'll move forward and get into a little bit more detail here with each of these. So when we are talking about pest ID, so biology and behavior, the reason that this is important for IPM is you really need to understand what does this pest do? What does this insect or disease do? I will talk mainly about insects today, but again, this all applies to pathogens that you might have in your garden as well, and even for weeds. So does this insect, is the concern that it spreads a virus, for example, through plant feeding, or does it just chew on the leaves? Maybe it's just an aesthetic situation that I can live with and that's all I'm ever gonna see is some chewing marks, or does it suck plant juices and affect the overall plant vigor and health, etc. When does it do what it does? The leaves, is this something that's going to affect the roots? Should I be looking on the stems to see if there's a pathogen present or signs of it, or insect pests like scale insects are often on the stems or the branches? And then really important as well is it even actually a pest? Many insects that you would see in the garden are actually beneficial or can just be neutral. They're there, but they're not really causing any damage. So it's important to learn to identify those as well, so there's no false alarms about something that you might be seeing. So the next pillar for IPM is this idea of regular monitoring, and something that really sets IPM apart from conventional pest management, which would be more the use of a calendar spray. So it's May 15th or it's June 15th, and we're gonna spray X product because that's just what we do. whether or not the pest is actually present. So IPM really looks to avoid the unnecessary entry of chemicals into the environment, and you're only employing a control method if it's warranted, if it's actually needed based on pest populations in the field. So that's why we learn about the pest ID biology and behavior, because that enables you to look in the right spot and know what you're looking for to gauge whether or not you need to make a control decision. So some examples I've included is that many aphid species tend to really prefer the new succulent growth. So check shoot tips, that new growth for infestation. That's likely where you'd be seeing them initially. Cabbage root maggot larvae, they will attack the roots, as I showed in that first photo on the intro slide. So you're looking in that area of the plant and looking for weak or discolored plants, and then investigating to see what's going on there. I've included a few links. There's a great resource here. I'm going to try and see if it will go. Looks like it is. And I think we can compile a list of resources at the end of the talk as well, if anyone is interested. We can circulate that as well. These are really great little summaries for different pests in a given crop. Small scale farmers IPM guide. So again, this can be applied to the home garden, a lot of the information, and just runs you through life cycle identification, how to monitor, when to act, etc. So this is a really great example of the IPM approach that these can be found online. Go back here to the, there we go. With regular monitoring, what are you doing? When I say monitoring, what does that really mean? So you are you're looking under leaves, on top of leaves, you're looking in the blossoms or fruit clusters, and on branches or stems. You're looking for lesions or spots or cankers. These could be due to disease. I find in the Yukon often these are actually, it's a physiological issue. So this is more due to extreme heat after like a cool cloudy day, and then the sun comes out and the heat goes up, and that can cause some scorching on the leaves, or cold, obviously. We have very few guaranteed frost-free opportunities here in the Yukon, so it's quite common to see frost or cold damage, or even wind can cause symptoms of what might look like a disease on your plant leaves. Wilting can be due to a virus. It can be due to root rot or just to drought stress. Discoloration on a plant, again, could be a virus or nutrient deficiency. In grasses here, we often see purpling, which is a phosphorus deficiency, or just an overall lighter green color can be a nitrogen deficiency. There's a whole lot of other different deficiencies and signs and symptoms you can look for. And there's resources online to help identify that as well. Stunting is another thing to look for. So when a plant just doesn't look quite right, doesn't look the same as its neighbors. Nutrient deficiencies again, or root damage where the roots have been compromised and that plant is just really struggling to keep up and uptake nutrients, which could be voles here, or could also be insect feeding. Chewing damage, so notches out of the edges of leaves or holes in leaves. Those could be caterpillars in many cases. We do have some flea beetles here in the Yukon that can cause like a shot hole, it's called, feeding damage. So it's just little holes that look like they've been punched through the leaf. And of course, the larger insect pests, the vertebrates, we have a lot of moose, anything can come through and nibble on the top of your plants. Webbing or frass. So frass is just the fancy technical term for insect poop. You'd be looking at the tips of leaves can often be kind of webbed together, or a berry cluster could have webbing. Somebody's making themselves a little home inside, and you'd see that webbing and frass. Two-spotted spider mites can also cause webbing. Usually at the point that you see webbing from two-spotted spider mites, it's kind of all hope is sort of lost. That's a pretty bad infestation if you actually start to see webbing, but they could be a cause of that as well. And then any deformed or unusual leaves like cupping or twisting. Again, that can be due to caterpillars or mite feeding damage, but sometimes that's herbicide damage if you have a neighbor that has applied something, or the city has applied something and it's a windy day, it can drift, not to point fingers at anybody. It's just something that can happen. And you say, why do the leaves look funny or twisted? It can be from herbicide. And I wanted to say, I mentioned virus a lot here. I don't think it's a huge concern for us in the Yukon, but in general, it can be something that farmers deal with across Canada. So the third pillar is this concept of decision making. And there are two really important thresholds in IPM when it comes to making a decision to treat or not treat for a pest. The first is called the economic threshold. So that's when the value of the crop that is being threatened to be destroyed is higher than the cost to control the pest. The goal is to utilize a control strategy before that threshold is reached. And the control strategy, or sorry, the threshold for that is called the action threshold. So that's identified through monitoring. You know whether or not you've hit that threshold after you've monitored your field. An example that I used a lot in my previous role was a recommendation would be to apply a control when 30% of blueberry shoot tips are infested with aphids. These thresholds require years of research to develop, and they often require tweaks over time based on local conditions and knowledge. So this is less applicable to the home garden setting, but the main reason I bring it up is because in IPM, pest presence does not equal immediate control. IPM aims to limit or suppress pest populations rather than fully eliminate them. And I put the picture here of this beet leaf miner as a good example. If anyone's seen these in their beets before, it can look pretty terrible and they can be all over the leaves. And it looks like you have a really bad infestation. And yes, they're certainly present in the leaves, but the root itself is typically not affected too badly. If you wanted to harvest the greens, this is not so appetizing looking, but it's an example of something you might see and go, okay, I know beet leaf miner are there, but I'm not too worried about it because my beets themselves are going to be okay. And so lastly, the IPM toolbox. So again, you're pulling from different control methods, depending on the situation, depending on your personal preference and approach to gardening. So cultural control, I think, is a really important one because this is more in the preventative sort of realm. So you're doing things that are discouraging the establishment of a pest population in your garden. So this could be a whole host of things, but it could be removing weeds or other host plants, planting flowering plants, so you're attracting pollinators or beneficial insects, resistant variety selection. Taryn, it was great to hear you say that the seeds at the seed library are, cold hardy, northern adapted, etc. So you can do yourself a lot of favors by selecting carefully what it is you're actually growing, and that it's resistant or a bit tougher, as well as rotating your crops through your garden area. So you don't want to be planting the same thing in the same spot year after year and just encouraging that pest population pressure building up. Next is mechanical or physical control. So this is really what it sounds like. It's a physical action that's either preventing access from an insect to your crop. So the use of row cover or mulches or even flame weeding could be included in that category. Third, biological control. So this is the use of predatory or parasitic insects that would be released into and often this is used in greenhouses. You have a really controlled environment there that you can release these predatory insects into. There's companies that rear them and have them for sale. I don't know how much this would be applicable here or the shipping of the insects, if that would be problematic. I kind of suspect not too much would happen, but I do know some greenhouses that have used them here. So that is an option as well. And then lastly, chemical control. So this is the use of a pesticide product. It's included in the toolbox, but it's typically a last resort in an IPM program. So I wanted to include, like I said, a nice thing about doing the talk this way is I can throw some great photos in here. So with the exception of the 2 spotted spider mite picture, these are all photos I've taken over the last couple of years. We've done, agriculture branch has done 3 years in a row now of this agricultural pest disease surveillance work. So we've gone out and monitored fields on a regular basis and set up traps and trying to figure out what it is we have present in our farmers' fields. So these are all pictures from that work. So we have Lygus present here, which is sort of a generalist insect. That's the nymph stage. Here, the adult looks similar body shape, but they're really distinct because they have a triangle shape on their back. So they can cause damage or misshapen fruit. They'll often be feeding when a plant is flowering, and then the resulting fruit can be affected. Cutworms, I'm sure many of you are familiar with cutworms, so there's several different species here. Their name is pretty descriptive of what they do. They'll just shear down new seedlings potentially. They can be pretty devastating. They seem to be, some species have an unpredictable, well, so far unpredictable sort of outbreak cycle. So this particular one is called a black army cutworm. And we've had reports of these. Some years we have an outbreak, and they're pretty alarming because there'll be thousands of them in a field, and then when they move to the next area they want to feed in, it's like they march all together. There's a black line going across the road of these cutworms moving from one place to the other, but we don't see them every year. We will get calls at the agriculture branch when they're out, and we'll usually put out some sort of notice or info to our farming community to let them know that it's an outbreak here. Clearly I could go on about them, but I'll stop there. This next picture is cabbage root maggot, so CRM, that's what that stands for. These are the adult flies, so they're kind of like an inconspicuous, there's nothing particularly special about the way they look, but if you know you have them in your garden, you can put up these sticky traps to confirm the adult presence. They're attracted to the yellow. And these sticky traps can be purchased at like either through an IPM supply company online, or just at like a Home Hardware. Canadian Tire usually stocks them as well. This there's thrips. I I don't know if you can see it. It's a little tiny brown line in the middle of this red circle. They're very small, slender little insects. They have rasping mouth parts, and they can cause bronzing on fruit. So again, their feeding can affect resulting fruit in the flowers. They'll feed in there as well. So I haven't seen too many thrips, like high levels here in the Yukon, but we do have them, and this is a haskap plant that they were hanging out in. Two-spotted spider mites and eggs. So this is a greatly magnified photo. Again, I did not take this photo. They're quite a common horticultural pest and really hard to detect. Often you need a magnifying glass of some kind to really be sure that they're in your plants. I've seen them here in raspberries. Again, they can be present, and a heavy infestation will just really reduce plant vigor, and they suck the plant juices as well. So over time, it won't be an immediate decline, but they can certainly impact the plant's health. Beet leaf miner, we've chatted about. The CRM eggs here, we've chatted about. And then the diamondback moth pupa. So here's a hole, likely a feeding hole from these caterpillars. These guys are interesting because they don't overwinter here in the Yukon. I think from as far south as Mexico, they actually are carried up on winds every year into the prairies and up north, and we'll see this pest on cabbage or broccoli. So cold crops can be infested with these guys. And there's more. Again, like I said, it's not exhaustive, but here's what we've run into over the last couple of years and have had confirmed. I wanted to talk about beneficial insects. So again, these are the guys that we're happy if you see these in your garden. This is a ladybug larva. They're really voracious aphid predators. They're kind of cool looking, like little alligator guys. So if you see that, they're pretty distinct. Nothing else really looks like them. This is good news if you see that in your garden. This is a syrphid fly larva, also an aphid predator. So this is the larva of a hoverfly. So if you see those little hoverflies that you may think at first is a bee, but they fly in a pretty distinct way, their larvae are really good aphid predators. And they're translucent. You can see their body parts within, and they move in a really distinct way. I don't think either they don't have eyes or they have very poor vision, and they'll kind of like flop around a leaf looking for aphids. So if you do see one of these guys, sit back and observe because they're pretty interesting to watch. And then lacewings. So again, these are an aphid predator, but I think any soft-bodied insect they would go after. Their eggs are really distinct. They're laid on stalks like this. So if you see these, that's good news. Good news. Here's the larva, and this is an adult. So this is a brown lacewing. So there's brown and green lacewings that I've seen before, both down south. I'm not entirely sure if we have both consistently in the Yukon, but we do have some lacewing species here. So next I'll move into some questions that I received in advance of the talk. So we got a question about sawfly and if there's any concerns about sawfly and haskaps. So there's two sawfly species that I'm aware we have here in the Yukon, the first being Saskatoon sawfly and the second being pear slug sawfly. So without being 100% confident about this, I think it's quite unlikely that we would need to be worried about them moving over to haskaps. Saskatoon sawfly is very host specific, so it's really interested in a certain plant family that haskaps are not part of. Pear slug sawfly is a bit of a broader host range, but again, I don't think that haskaps is a preferred host species. And again, I'll click on these links. Hopefully they work. So Saskatoon sawfly. So you can see there's scars here from egg laying from the adult. The larva has been developing within the fruit, the adult, and then it's difficult to see, but there's holes here, which would likely be an exit hole from the, after pupation, the adult exiting the berry. So that's what you're looking at with a Saskatoon sawfly. Pear slug sawfly. They're kind of not the cutest little larva here. This is in pear, and so that's quite devastating injury. That's a really bad infestation. But I haven't heard too much of a lot of issues with these guys. But yeah, if anybody does see anything on haskaps, please report it to us because that would be interesting to know about. Next, I had a question about permaculture and pest management. And I mean, I don't have specific information around that, but permaculture can and does certainly incorporate many of the same principles as IPM. So you're looking at preventing, creating a situation that there is potential for pest buildup. You're looking at building soil health. You're encouraging beneficial insects and really going with an agro-ecosystem approach. So I think there's a lot of overlap there. And maybe once I open it up, if there's more specific questions, we can chat about that. But I think there's loads of linkages between the two. We also got a question about white flies, and I think that was like these mystery white flies. I think it was out in a more remote area. I didn't know. I chatted to Randy Lamb in our office. He suspects that it could be aspen leaf miner, which we're probably all, anyone who's been out for a walk in the past 10 years would notice a lot like this, that we see a lot here. So there is the adult fly stage, which, sorry, it is in here. So there's a little leaf miner. That would be the adult. It's possible that that might be what you're seeing. Also questions about aphids, the enduring pest problem. I don't have any sort of silver bullet answer, but when you're bringing plants home from the garden center or nursery, just do a check and make sure you're bringing home something healthy and not introducing that into your garden or greenhouse, etc. Sprays can help. I've included a recipe here that Randy can vouch for. He said particularly if you use fresh hot peppers, he's had good success with this. So there's an option there to try an aphid spray. And encouraging beneficials. Again, there's those 3 beneficial insects that I mentioned are great aphid predators. And so if you do have some aphids, maybe see what happens, and you might have an opportunity to attract beneficials that'll take care of the problem for you. And then also from the same person, we had a question about ants, and that was really interesting to me because the ants are probably there because of the aphids. Ants will ranch the aphids and they collect the honeydew. So aphids secrete, it's called honeydew. It's this sweet liquid from their bodies, and the ants really like that. And they will actually kind of tend to the aphids and farm them in order to access the honeydew. So ants as a pest in the garden are really, again, they're actually more of like a neutral situation. They might be annoying to look at, but they're not really harming the plants in most cases. They're probably there because of aphids. So I mean, there's, again, if you look up ant control, there's a whole bunch of different like sort of home methods that you could employ. I think I read like cayenne pepper or baking soda. So there's a few different things you could do, but they're not really causing a problem to your garden, likely. I think, yeah, that was my last slide. So feel free to reach out, contact me. And Randy, also my coworker at Agriculture Branch, is a gardener and the years of experience and knowledge. So he would be also a great resource. So I guess I'll stop sharing and we can open it up for any questions that came through.
I can send them to you in the chat, or I can ask them directly. What's your preference?
Maybe just ask them directly so I don't miss any, which
okay, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so first question, my snow pea plants are 10 to 15 centimeters tall, and something is nipping them off and leaving them the soil below. I'm wondering if it might be a bird or a rodent, and what can I do about that?
So, like, well, my first thought was potentially a cutworm if it's just sheared off near the soil. That's a potential something that could be happening. And I know from gardener, a market gardener, I know she's had quite a few issues with cutworms this year, so that wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
So what if it was something that's just nipping them off, but they're just falling down and leaving them?
So the plant is it like completely separated? Like it's completely sheared off?
Let's assume yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, there's like, I mean, at that, if it has been cut off at the soil level and the plant is now fallen over, I would investigate the soil for cutworms. That's what I would check for. They often curl up in a C shape, and they would be in the soil, or they may have moved on if they've already done a number on your snow peas.
Okay, great. And I just got confirmation. Yeah, sheared off 3 to 5 centimeters from the top. So I think that probably answers that one.
Okay.
Okay, so the next question is, so someone has tiny holes about 1 millimeter that have appeared on radish leaves, and all of the leaves are covered, but they've noticed tine sesame seed black bugs in plentiful numbers. What can they do?
That one is one that I'm gonna do some, I can read up on. I don't know if it's, yeah, I would have to check into it. It's hard without seeing photos. Photos are super helpful. If you do have photos of any of these things and can send them to either of the email addresses, that helps a lot. Yeah, sorry, I'm not super helpful on that one, but I've taken a note of it. And if anyone wants to reach out after, please do.
Perfect. Okay, the next question. Something is chomping big holes off the plant top of pea and chard seedlings. I've tried to spray garlic, red pepper flakes. Any other suggestions?
Was there any, I mean, if there was no success with a homemade sort of spray, like the aphid spray there, I think it had the option for some soap in there as well. That can affect beneficials potentially too. Like I wouldn't recommend being dousing everything on a super regular basis. And the plant would not be thrilled with that either. Yeah, so it sounds like it didn't work applying the spray.
Yeah, I think I'm assuming so, yeah.
Okay. Without knowing, a caterpillar would make larger holes likely if we didn't see what it was actually there. Like it's always helpful, which is not always possible, but to catch something in the act, right? Snap a photo of it. Afterwards, other than a few really distinct feeding patterns, sometimes you know what was there because of the way they feed on the plant. But if it's sort of a nondescript hole in the leaf or chew mark in the leaf, it can be hard to say what that would have been.
And do you know if beneficial insects are available to purchase, similar to like how we buy bees?
So I mean, I know there are certainly companies that do, like I said, rear them, and they are available for purchase. In terms of purchasing anything from out of territory and bringing it in, you would want to make sure that does the shipping, would that even work? Can they stay alive coming from point A to point B, and that you're not introducing anything that could have the potential to be an invasive species. So it is a commonly utilized tool in more established agricultural settings or a greenhouse, for example. I would just proceed with caution. And if you're unsure, ask. There's a few different experts in the territory in terms of invasive species or just what we need to be aware of before we go and buy some new insect pests to release.
Great advice.
Yeah.
I think I have 2 more questions.
Sure.
So is there anything I can do about small worms in the soil eating my turnips and beets?
So in the soil, again, like cabbage, there are root maggots that are pretty common here. That's definitely an established pest. In a larger scale agricultural setting, there are spray products that can be purchased to take care of them, and some of them are like approved for use in organics, so it's a more gentle product. I would have to see what would be available to a home gardener for any products. And I know most people want to avoid anything that is like a more conventional chemical pesticide. Row cover can be used to prevent the adults from accessing and laying eggs there. But row cover doesn't work if they're already in the soil. So if, again, that crop rotation comes in, it is important. So you're hopefully avoiding doing something where they're already under the row cover that you've then applied. So that would be my suspicion for the turnips. And for the beets, again, I'm sorry to keep saying a photo, but that's a different plant species, right? So the cabbage root maggot wouldn't be affecting them. So I don't have a great guess of what that might be.
Okay, well, you're figuring this out all on the spot without photos. So far so good, because we only have 2 more questions. And I'm sure that these folks will be able to email their photos and then we can follow up.
Photos is great, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So are there plants or flowers that can be good to plant that aphids don't like?
I always hear that like marigolds are good to incorporate in your garden. Anything, again, aphids are challenging because there's some aphids certainly are host specific and prefer certain types of plant species, but there's a lot that will eat. They're more generalist. So marigolds is one that I'm aware of is commonly used. And then on the flip side, things like alyssum are good as like a companion plant to attract beneficial insects. So I think about doing both, planting potentially companion plants that are deterrents and planting companion plants that are attractants to the beneficials that you want to help control the aphids that might be there.
Okay, great. And final question,
Mhm.
that we have here is, what are the black scabs on potatoes?
Oh, right, those the black ones. Okay, so there's scab in potatoes. Common scab, which is really challenging to control once it's in a given area. I think there is a certain number of years that you should not be planting in an area if you have common scab. I think the black scab, I have had this question recently, and it could be related to rhizoctonia, but email me please, because I've had this question before and we did figure out what that is. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, great. Um, okay, so those were all of the questions. I saw we got the beneficial insect question again, but that one was answered. So
Okay.
I think that's a good follow-up email.
Yeah. Sounds good. And
Awesome.
there, I wanted to note too, there's a lot of really good resources online. So, like honestly, like Googling, like the best description you have of what you might be seeing, like small white worms in beets or whatever, it's going to help lead you to some potential resources. And I would recommend most of the provincial websites, like you saw I pulled up from Manitoba or BC, have really, really good IPM programs and resources. So certainly encourage you to check that out too. With any questions, you'll probably get close to an answer. And we also, agriculture branch offers soil testing services. That's more for nutrient assessment. But we also, if we're seeing a recurring problem or we're hearing about it enough, we are connected with Southern labs. We could send an insect pest sample, or we could send a plant sample. That's a little bit more challenging because it's more time sensitive. Like you have to get it down pretty quick before it decomposes, and confirm either a pathogen presence or insect species. So, I mean, we can't do it on a regular basis for home gardeners, but that's something that the branch does look to do to help understand what we have potential issues with.
Mhm. Okay. And the person who had asked the potato question
Mhm.
said that they'll try and email you when it's potato season, so that they can get a photo, I think.
That sounds
So
great.
yeah, so that's
And I'm
awesome.
going to look it up too after, because we did have a sample submitted last year and I'm just not 100% confident on what the name was, but yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen it before.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.